Foreign ministers of the BRICS group of nations have met to discuss expansion and ways to challenge U.S. dominance in the global economy. Could the bloc shift the balance of the world's trade and power, or is it a political pipe dream?
At the heart of the problems we face is economic concentration that leaves too many nations at the mercy of too few.
What are the links that there should be between BRICS and G20 in an increasingly, in our view, multipolar world?
Very interesting seeing how the world wants to move away from the US dollar and its unipolar hegemony and start transitioning to perhaps a multipolar world where different currencies from different countries and different conglomerate of countries may be working together to, create payment rails and have their government currencies and fiat use those payment rails to interconnect for trade with one another. Not only that, but perhaps some of these will trickle down to us common folks where we get to trade with one another for day-to-day transactions that are on the chain or off the blockchain or on ledgers and off the ledgers. We'll see how that all unfolds here at the Financial Almanac on Basel. And let's have a quick look on what the BRICS have to say about their payment system and what would inspire them to move away from the dollar.
That we do not become victim to sanctions that have secondary effects on countries that have no involvement in issues that have led to those unilateral sanctions.
Once we've weaponized our US dollar against countries, that sent a signal, a ripple effect across time and space to all countries, basically letting them know, hey, if we don't like you, you will be sanctioned and we will put tariffs on your trades.
But now we're also seeing calls to reduce the dependence on the US dollar from corners of the globe, including allies of ours like France and maybe India and others. Should we be more concerned now in slapping sanctions on countries around the world and taking that into consideration and be more thoughtful as we may be creating a paranoia around the world where people are looking for other currencies to do transactions?
It is true that when we impose sanctions, countries that are afraid they can be the subject of those sanctions are motivated to look for other tools other than the dollar to engage in transactions. So
but even
that's
our
something
friends...
we have to accept. It is much more difficult to find other tools to make payments, other currencies, when we work jointly with
But we even
partners.
have our friends like France also looking for other currencies and pushing it.
We see that Russia actually owns billions of dollars worth in rupees. That is the Indian economy because of trades of energy. And they have this money, but they don't own it. It's in India right now. They can't receive those billions of dollars worth of rupees into the Russian economy because of these restrictions that are in place. So, if you do trade energy and you want to receive payments, how could you if you're using a third party's, restrictive sanctions, in this example, payment rails, right? So it's important to create your own system, your own network to help trade with one another, because this is the effects of weaponizing the payment rails that takes place. And let this be a lesson for all networks out there, that if you start hindering the operation, the flow of energy, in this case it's money, there will be other things that will come up in your short-term future that will bypass that power. So it is a one-time bullet, and we're learning that lesson here in the States.
One of the challenges that the BRICS have brought up is the transactional impact that they face in terms of monetary sovereignty. And I think my colleagues are alluding to that in terms of I think the real question for the summit in August would be institutionalizing the aspects of BRICS Pay through maybe also digital currency platforms as well.
Another reason to take note of the potential that BRICS Pay may bring is because Russia, when it was sanctioned, this cut off $300 billion, that's with a B, from them using it for other trades. Now, the reason this is not only super substantial to notice is because once this is fully developed, the BRICS Pay system, and something happens in, say, like 2 or 3 years, such as China taking back Taiwan because it's one China policy, And Taiwan is where we get our semiconductors here in the US. And like I said in my Treasury bills video, that if we don't bring manufacturing, especially semiconductors, back here to the US and we keep relying on Taiwan, this will not only show us more exposed in the future when it comes to computing and technology, this will give us a weak point where China takes back Taiwan and we have to sanction China. You know what that puts them in a line? If Russia was $300 billion, this will our sanction will basically close off $3.2 trillion with a T, trillion dollars, $3.2 trillion of Chinese dollars and their treasuries and their, reserves. This is huge. That's 10 times more that we'll be sanctioning than Russia. And so it's imperative to keep an eye and have good developing relations with China, especially if we don't have our own manufacturing sector coming back here. And so if $3.2 trillion of Chinese reserves is on the line, I'm pretty sure they want to be able to have a network where they can evade sanctions issued by NATO and its allies, right? And so, Russia, with $300 billion, we're able to go to China. Now, who is China going to go to? Right? That's why I'm pretty sure they're going to follow through with BRICS Pay, and the new development bank will be one of the many institutions that will adopt BRICS Pay alongside other, payment rails as well.
One part of it is actually to consolidate how the existing BRICS members are working with each other. The second part of it is how the BRICS engages non-BRICS countries. And the third part of it is how we look at potential expansion.
We see many countries accept the Chinese yuan when it comes to trade, bypassing the US dollar and continuing the move to de-dollarize. Here's Jerome Powell being asked about how the Chinese and the rest of the world how it's moving away from dollarizing.
Is particularly the CCP that seem intent on de-dollarization. How seriously should the threat of de-dollarization be taken, in your view?
Well, the status of the United States, of the dollar as the world's reserve currency, is a very important thing to us. I think the reason we have that status is largely due to our great democratic institutions, the rule of law, and the fact that we have, generally speaking, had strong levels of price stability. And I think that the dollar will remain the reserve currency as long as those things are in place.
Isn't it the fact that the use of the dollar has diminished and gone down against competing currencies over the years?
There's been some increase in holdings of other reserve assets, but that's something to be expected in a growing world economy where there is a desire to diversify, but
so we should expect less use of the dollar, is what you're saying. We should anticipate.
We should expect over time gradually increased share of other assets in reserve holdings of countries. It's a natural desire to diversify, but the dollar is far and away the dominant reserve
It's
asset.
still a huge concern.
So as the rest of the world starts to do trade with one another and not using the dollar, using other commodities and other currencies, we see that, there's going to be a multifaceted, multipolar world with its trade as well. We also see that the economic growth of the BRICS countries is mainly propelled by China. Now, over time, there are other countries in the BRICS nations have been developing, just the fastest pace is by China.
We had one of the senior executives of the new development bank briefing our meeting on work that the bank has been doing, looking at the potential use of alternative currencies to the current internationally traded currencies.
So the new development bank is actually the BRICS bank, as the people like to call it. And this new development bank is running lots of projects around the world where people from developing countries can go to this developing country-based bank to support their infrastructure that they want to build as well. And we see that with the BRICS Pay system being not only used in the new development bank, but new development bank also accepts cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, then this will be a huge advantage for the East, especially in the future that we are unraveling and voting together to build as the people.
That was adopted last year at the BRICS summit in terms of BRICS Pay, a kind of interpayment settlement system in local currency. And I think there is the sense that you get when you speak to officials from the South African side in particular, but also the Sherpas that are involved in this whole preparation of the BRICS, is that there is a cautionary approach to whether you want to create a third global currency that is a BRICS currency. I think right now the bigger challenge for the BRICS is to understand how they reduce transactional costs, and in particular, how do they reduce the kind of secondary sanctions that prevail and catch them in the sanctions around the SWIFT. Also something that is critical, because one of the challenges that the BRICS have brought up is the transactional impact that they face in terms of monetary sovereignty.
This alliance has come together and developed a payment rail system for their own fiat currencies, right? So since, external influences will be affecting one another, like sanctions issued from Washington that will affect Moscow, right? We want to see what developments will be coming up along the world as this economic, warfare goes around. So here at BRICS Pay on their website, we see that they're claiming that they're decentralized multi-currency digital international payment system. In order for something to be decentralized, meaning there can't be a central government or conglomerate of centralized government. BRICS, once they have the new development bank, that may be a participant, but I don't believe it's decentralized because they don't use nodes like Bitcoin does, right, for its hash power to secure the blockchain. If something wants to be removed from the ledger, BRICS can definitely come together and use that. Nowadays, people are using the word decentralized just because it uses blockchain. They're two different concepts. Blockchain is just like having a book, but in a digital format. And decentralized meaning everyone has the same copy of the book, like how people have, say, like the Quran that hasn't been changed in God knows how long, right? You guys can tell me down below, where it hasn't been changed, right? It's decentralized because people memorize that book so much to the point where it's like a title in the culture. That is being decentralized, right? So if you change one Quran, it won't matter because so many people have memorized it. Now, having something decentralized means that if something is centralized, meaning NATO can control their ledger and they can revise it. Even though there's many participants in NATO, many countries, they can do that. Here at BRICS Pay, it could definitely be revised, whether it's the new development bank or the countries can come together and change that blockchain. But it's a marketing word, so I understand what they put it there, but let's be real. It's not like every participant's gonna have the ledger on their phone or on their computer and are gonna be validating transactions. That's not gonna happen, right? It's gonna be centralized. And so BRICS Pay project. BRICS Pay is a joint venture between the 5 BRICS countries that was launched in 2018 by the BRICS Business Council, among the top priorities in the annual report. The team behind the venture consists of individuals from all 5 countries. This includes experts in payments, banking, technology, and other related fields. They are responsible for developing the platform, creating new features, and providing customer support. Additionally, the team is responsible for managing relationships. BRICS Pay is a digital payment platform that is being jointly developed by the members of the BRICS nations. BRICS Pay aims to enable digital payments between different countries and BRICS Plus formats, allowing businesses and customers to securely and seamlessly make and receive payments in their local currencies. The platform is designed to reduce the cost and complexity of international payments while also providing a secure and reliable way to pay for goods and services. So BRICS Payments is just creating a payment rail, and each country will be using their fiat to put on that rail, sort of like a train track, and then you have the cars of the train that's going to be placed on the tracks and it can go wherever they want. So they want to develop the system very much like other payment systems that exist today. BRICS Pay principles and advantages. BRICS Pay set benefits from a combination of traditional payment system and new technologies such as central bank digital currencies, decentralized finance, and tokenized assets, quote-unquote secured money. BRICS Pay is an expansion of payment options for companies and citizens of participating countries, as well for the entire world in all existing or emerging payment solutions. This is the reason why they believe they're decentralized. They claim that the financial flows are distributed among certain, right? Certain is not decentralized, certain is a specific number of participants are not concentrated in the hands of central operators. So it's concentrated in a specific certain number of participants. Some of you guys can get together and change something, but the rest of us can't. All right. This reduces the risk of system failures, increases the stability and transparency of working conditions. So if they are actually transparent and the ledger is public, that we can view it and we can keep track, and let's say it isn't immutable and these certain number of participants don't get together and have a consensus that they will change their blockchain, then maybe we can keep them accountable. But this transparency might be a facade. Let's just say it might be translucent at best, right? It might be a system shutdown for server upgrades, and all of a sudden the ledger system comes back up and, oh look, we've done this, and they'll silence or they'll censor things that go on the internet so people can't communicate that they traded things. Being interoperable through the open use of APIs, the BRICS system will ensure that customers have access to their accounts no matter what payment system they use. Funds can move easily between systems faster and more securely is what they claim. So we'll see as they have, a conglomerate of different institutions working together amongst these 5 core nations, and as countries start to adopt, inaugurated into the BRICS nations, we'll see how those new members will be accepting this payment system and how they will incorporate it into their system, because they are claiming interoperability. So whether it's airtime or prepaid cards, we'll see how that goes, and maybe they will start communicating with one another, not only on that international level, but also between us. If I were to go to a store and use a prepaid card, or let's say my checking or debit account, we'll see how these system works, because that is the future. There is going to be many payment rails that we as consumers and creators start to use. And so there'll be many options that we use, and obviously there'll be markets that will try to undercut one another for reducing their fees, and they'll be benefiting the clients and the consumers. So that world will continue to develop, and we'll see that competition flourish. And as we cooperate with one another, we will make sure that we share with the best insights are for you and me. So be sure to subscribe so we can catch those as those matters unveil. If we were to go back, they claim that they want to bring justice, equal rights for all parties involved in the financial transactions, so that no party receives an unfair advantage. Nice and dandy and everything, but we'll see how that works out. It's easier said, right, than done. And inclusiveness, they want to be very inclusive apparently. The system is accessible and provides an equal opportunity for individuals and businesses, regardless of their background or financial history, regardless of income, location, or other factors not contrary to law. So this is very interesting. Inclusiveness. I guess the most inclusive way that this should perhaps be adopted into the masses are countries around the world that don't have developing areas, very rural areas, right? Where there isn't a lot of technology there, right? So let's say some people still have some cell phones, right? People have flip phones or old Nokia phones in a lot of parts of the world, but they don't have IDs. They're walking around with no IDs, working in their farms and in the rural areas. And what they do have is, their phone, and they use prepaid airtime or prepaid credits of a sort to add to their phone so they can use that phone. Now, if they don't need a bank account, right, and they can have funds on their phone, and they can just Bluetooth or AirDrop or whatever technology that would be interoperable for these guys. The technology is here, like UMU and my other video regarding FedNow and international CBDCs. The system does exist where they can just airdrop funds from one another, right? So as the world continues to unveil this technology, it will be very beneficial for very rural people to be able to transact. And if BRICS Pay does adopt something very similar to that, where there's things that take place on the chain, on the ledger, and transactions can also take place off the ledger, like cash does, right? Where you don't need a ledger, where if I give you cash, nobody knows about it except me and you, right? Not the ledger, not the government, not the clerk, right? At the store, not the cashier, if I spot you some money, right? It's the exact same sort of philosophy where you want to have transactions on the ledger and off the ledger. if that interoperability, that interconnectedness, that justice, that inclusiveness is up and running, that'll be amazing. That'll give a huge leg up compared to other systems around the world that will be covered later on in this video, like the FedNow system and banks' CBDCs.
I want to turn to a different subject. It's been brought up by a number of my banks back home relating to a central bank digital currency or any federal issued coin. We have seen how this administration and the last Congress wanted to require anyone who made more than $600 on a third-party settlement organization like an eBay purchase has to report that to the IRS. The existing threshold before the law was modified was $20,000. That is how far this administration wants to peek behind the curtain of what my constituents are spending their money on. And $600 in Iowa doesn't go a long way. It's the equivalent of a PlayStation or paying for your kids' dance classes. I'm a dad of 6. I digress on this, but I do want to know specifically, for my constituents back home, the thoughts of creating a central bank digital currency that tracks individuals. If the Fed were to offer a direct individual account to citizens, wouldn't this be a direct threat to the financial privacy of many Americans?
Potentially, and that's why it's not something we support. We would not support, accounts at the Federal Reserve by individuals. That would not be. If we were to, and we're a long way from this, if we were to support at some point in the future a CBDC, it would be one that were intermediated through the banking system and not directly at the Fed for exactly the reason you point out.
I'm very happy to hear that. I think that's a good partnership with the individuals there and a respect for Americans across the board.
All right, so they're saying they're also responsible. All parties involved in a financial transaction must be accounted for their actions and decisions. Everyone is basically learning that blockchain technology sometimes is irreversible. If I send you some Bitcoin, I cannot basically call up whatever network I did and ask for that Bitcoin back because I sent you too much, or I sent it because of a scam phishing attack, which I would not promote. Do not send me anything. This is not an endorsement for funds. Keep your funds, please do, right? And so that responsibility of having something centralized has that only benefit, right? We're not all masters of Bitcoin and technologies like that, so sometimes it's good to have an intermediate. So I do see the benefit of that, but sometimes we also have to be responsible and make sure that our private keys are ours, so our funds don't get confiscated. If these guys do provide the features of having a hardware wallet, a cold wallet that can operate offline, and you keep your 24 private keys or some sort of security feature where you are your own bank, that would be incredible. And we get to use the BRICS payment system, right? The BRICS Pay as a rail for transactions if we want to settle things between, me and my buddy who uses WeChat or, CICI Bank in India. We'll be able to communicate with one another using this interoperable BRICS Pay system. But I want to make sure that my money cannot be confiscated by the government that I operate in, whether it's the US, India, or China for that matter, right? So that'll be amazing. Right? Efficiency. The payment system will have low transaction costs and fast payment processing times. Because of blockchain technology, we're able to have high transaction outputs and inputs, and settlements can happen quite readily nowadays. Security. The payment system ensures use of financial information and transactions and is highly protected from fraud and cyber attacks. Well, the security is really interesting because that shows that it is centralized. Since this is still fiat for the fiat rails, there's no basically inputs of energy to secure the system. Everything's going to be on servers, and it's not going to be using nodes and hash graphs and hash rates to develop the security. There's no mining feature to create the funds. Everything will just be printed up like a proof of stake system. So that security is definitely not immutable. It definitely can be changed and altered, but that's all banks have that sort of same capabilities where their structure is basically depending on their firewalls and everything's centralized. So their security is going to be very much standard to what we're used to when we go to our banks. They claim to be transparent, so their transparency for BRICS Pay should have clear rules and regulations that publicly communicated to all participants. So their transparency, I believe, is not so much that you can see what's happening on their BRICS Pay ledger. It's more along the lines of here's the rules and regulations conditions or terms and conditions, end user agreement, and we're gonna, you can read the fine print and click accept. That's what they're claiming is transparency, which isn't the transparency we want. We want transparency in terms of we can keep the ledger accountable in case it gets changed, but that's what they're offering. Sustainability. BRICS Pay is designed to promote long-term economic stability and resilience of artificial barriers to economic development, which is very important. That's negotiations, right? That's speaking, that's dialogue, that's diplomacy, and I think that's important, right? If things get weaponized, and as we see with the sanctions on Russia, and this sustainability with the resilience of artificial barriers to economic development seems to be quite crucial in the growth of developing countries. We don't want to be hindered with a ball and chain and restricted on how we do business because we're mature countries. These guys are mature countries and they want to be able to trade amongst each other. Who's going to tell them not to do that, right? Obviously, there's army bases that are surrounding these countries, so there's going to be a lot of tippy-toeing around a lot of this stuff, but they also do have knockout punches of nuclear arsenal, like Putin has shared with us. All right, so back to the BRICS Pay. Here we see that the project structure is overseen by heads of the 5 working groups of financial services of the BRICS Business Council of 5 countries. The doors to the projects are open to all participants. You can join the project by contacting the BRICS, so you can contact them if you want to do that. All right, so here we see that there's Russia, India, Brazil, China, and South Africa for the BRICS payment system. Let's zoom into Russia and see what they have. So these seems to be like institutions that will be operating in Russia that can use the payment network of BRICS Pay. Here we see India also have banks and other institutions that will be using the BRICS payment system. We have China using the same idea where they have different apps, institution, and banks. Same thing with Brazil using institution, banks, and apps. And South Africa, where they have institutions, some banks, and the payment network and PASA that I believe also other countries use outside of South Africa, like Tanzania, Congo, Kenya. That will be really cool because if I can say go to Kenya and pick up some M-Pesa from Safaricom, and I can go to Tanzania or South Africa and use the remaining balance, and everybody that's a participant of BRICS Pay and a non-participant of BRICS Pay can operate on the network.
At Nairobi, paying with your bills on your mobile, it's easier than frankly anywhere else. Now, I'm not talking about contactless or any nonsense where you're Venmoing or PayPaling. I'm talking about where you literally walk into a shop or speak to somebody, they give you their number, you give them yours, bish, bosh, bosh, and it's all done, money transferred. Kenya has become a world leader in the mobile banking revolution, and it's all thanks to the system M-Pesa. It was launched by Vodafone's Safaricom, and in only a decade, M-Pesa has expanded its money transfer service to almost 30 million customers across 10 countries.
And it'll be really nice if they also incorporate cryptocurrency, where if I want to hold some Ethereum, Ether, or Bitcoin on my BRICS Pay app, that will be amazing. That way I can just convert it right in the app, where they have some sort of exchange built in where it'll convert, or if I can just keep my hard wallet there. That would create such large adoption. It'll inspire other nations to not only compete for that same sort of user interface, that same customer transactions, who brings the money. Continuing with BRICS Pay, we see that their financial messaging is an independent distributed system with asymmetric encryption, supports a Swift messaging standard, and will also work with CIPS and SPFS messaging. Basically, it'll work with the United States government and other networks like in Europe and other developed payment rail systems as well. So it's interoperable that way, which is really exciting because you can still settle bills and stuff like that. It just won't be able to sanction, right? But it'll be a participant. You can plug it in, but it won't affect the whole machine. Message conversion. The BRICS Pay financial messaging system involves the creation of payment messages converter between different formats. BRICS CBDC, here we go. Settlements between BRICS Pay countries are expected to be made in wholesale digital currency. The principles of interaction with national currencies, calculation of rates, emissions, and clearing are under development. So this is something that the countries will be developing. So currently BRICS, right, with its participating countries, have about 3 billion people in its population in this organization. It covers 40 million square kilometers, which is about 30% of the land of the earth, and 24 trillion US dollars, which is over a quarter of the world's GDP, gross domestic product, and $3 trillion, which is in trade of exports and imports of the world, is about 20% of the world's imports and exports. If BRICS Pay were to finally be fully developed and accepted by all these institutions, banks, and countries, and allied countries, and even non-membered countries as well, we can see that the GDP of the BRICS, not only is it over 25% of the world, not including PPP. If we were to include PPP, it would be great, even greater, right? But not only is it like outpacing the G7 and whatnot, we see that it has huge potential to have non-members also use their platform for transactions. If they also have it where there's the ones that take place on the ledger, and it's also outside of the ledger, like cashless, like cash-based transactions, but now everything's digital, that would be huge. That would help the unbanked, that would help the world that doesn't have a bank account, that would help the rural people, that will help the first class, the middle class, and the disenfranchised. It'll help every sector of our society, and it would bring the world into a whole other industrial revolution. BRICS Pay, if it does finally develop and move out and roll out, it will work alongside other payment rail systems. Other institutions and other conglomerate of countries can come up with their own payment rails, and everyone has options. If you're a tourist, you're able to use this, that, and if they start being interoperable, that would be amazing. But you want to make sure that you also protect your privacy and your human rights to expression and whatnot, so you don't be, you don't have to trade your freedom for security, as a lot of these guys want to tell you, right? Make sure that your freedom is still with you, so you don't want to infringe on that, but at the end of the day, it's in cooperation of, not in competition of, and that's has to be abundantly clear, because this isn't going to replace anything. In fact, it'll just supplement what we're used to already as we tap, as we use our smartphones and smartwatches, and send all the transactions from one another. It'll just supplement that system. Because of the BRICS nations putting together this payment rail system, the security should be one of the top priorities as they develop this as well, alongside the privacy aspect and the dual nature of having something part of the BRICS Pay ledger and something that is not on the ledger. That way it acts as cash, but in the digital format. That is imperative. Security, interoperability, and having the private and public sector aspect of it. That way everyone can use it like actual cash, like actual currency, right? And this will be a huge advantage compared to, say, other countries or conglomerate of countries when they come up with their payment network, that yes, they might have security, or later on they might have interoperability, but they might not have that public or private aspect where things are on the ledger, you can do transactions with, like let's say at a store, or if I want to have my friend, lend me $50, they can just do that without it being public ledger, right? So that will be huge, and that will give a huge upper hand to BRICS Pay. Now, if they don't want to do that, and they want to be more democratic regarding everything will be part of the public sector, nothing will be in the private sector, then nothing really has changed. So when the BRICS payment system does fully develop, it'll offer non-members that are interested in perhaps joining BRICS to use this network to do trade amongst themselves, whether they're using the digital yuan or something else like the real or whatever, right? And so this will help those countries that are not really allies with the West, like Iran or Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria, a lot of these Arabian, countries, or Moorish countries, or, non-Albion, non-Slavic, non-Germanic, Frankish countries, to do business with one another without the imperialism of the West as well, right? So this will create highways and rails for them to operate outside of the SWIFT system, outside of the systems that we use here in the West. So You see that China has already made a digital CBDC. Practice makes perfect, what China wants from its digital currency in 2023. Here we see Russia's CBDC legislation expands foreign access. So they're coming up with their own CBDCs. Here we see India coming up with their own CBDCs as a form of digital token that represents legal tender. And we see also Brazil having participants testing out their CBDC and developing ways to move forward with this project. As we see here, I'm not going to get into this, but every single country has put together some sort of CBDC project. That way they can use it not only domestically, but internationally with trade as well. BRICS Pay will be used by these countries and their citizens to connect with one another and have a more digital presence and less cash in the future as well. But this comes also not only in this system, it also happens with the FedNow system in the States, where Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve, this private company, has developed a payment rail so that way commercial banks can come up with their coins, right, their CBDCs. Not central bank, in that point that'll be more commercial bank digital currencies, right? They'll have their own ledgers or their own coins on their own ledgers, right? It'll still be centralized, and they'll be able to use the FedNow to operate their transactions as well, like I've explained. But here it is again, in case you missed it. Payment system will make it so that businesses and people will be able to send and receive instant payments 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's because funds will be able to settle within real time, and it'll just take a few seconds. So here's a quick example of how this will be implemented and used. Let's say that you're a coffee shop owner and you want to make a delivery on some coffee beans. Once you got to request a payment from your supplier, you would pay through a participating bank like your credit union, and the coffee bean supplier would instantly receive your payment. On the back end of things, your credit union would send an ISO 20022, which is a digital form of the FedNow system, which would validate it and send a message to the coffee beans bank that's receiving. The bank would then confirm in real time, and it would receive the payment, and the FedNow service would then debit and credit the money and then send a message to both banks that the settlement was completed. And there'll probably be something in your area as well, so stay tuned to this channel. Let me know what country you're from. Since China was leading the way in terms of CBDCs, we see that they probably put immense amounts of research into finding what is the best way to keep track of everything that's happening on this blockchain called the CBDC, the digital yuan, if you will. And with Russia having sanctions, I'm sure, they are more, a little bit more rushed than say China is. China will probably be more patient, and having the BRICS Pay network come up and running. With the research that China has done and the urgency that Russia is putting forward, with Shanghai being the headquarters for the new development bank, we definitely can just assume that with this blockchain interoperability aspect on the ledger, where the CBDCs will not only be able to transact, but will also be able to clear, and how the US won't be the only option to have a clearinghouse, whether it's with the FedNow or FedWire or real-time payment RTP network for their commercial banks. We see that people around the world and countries around the world will be able to choose which system they want in cooperation, not in competition, with exception to Russia. Because of the sanction, Russia is forced to basically do more trade away from the West and to do more trade with the BRICS nation and other people in the Far East. But besides Russia, right, China, India, they still do more trade with the West and Europe and its allies, right? So even BRICS Pay will not be used internally alone. Most of the transactions that these guys do, internationally speaking, is with the West. So China and India are still going to do a lot of business with here. So it's not competition. I just want to remind you guys, it's cooperation. And the more choices you have, the better. And that the BRICS isn't going to be pulling any strings without the West. The West is still quite pivotal in the world's global economics, because not only is it the majority with the US and its allies, that even if we are no longer the head honcho, we're not going anywhere. Even with de-dollarization, we're still going to be used. We're still a huge impact. If there is a multipolar world and things work out like we're talking about today, that we would still need to cooperate with one another, right? We're still going to exist. We're still going to do trade with one another. And that's why that interoperability, that cooperativeness, and having a selection that open market competitiveness for, you know, best product, best value, less fees, having options being created is going to be the key foundation, and not having to be forced where our freedom has to be traded in, where the government's going to pitch securities for your safety and in exchange for some of your freedom, right? We know that never works out in history. And so as we pursue and unfold this future together, we want to make sure that we keep our freedom, our options, and start cooperating one another for a brighter future, no matter what payment network we use, whether it's BRICS Pay, FedNow, or if you're for the people and you use privacy cryptocurrencies like Monero and pseudo-anonymous, things that are more value commodity based, that are highly secured like Bitcoin. If you made it this far, I want to say thank you for investing in yourself, and I want to give you a like. Let me know how by commenting down below, and subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching Financial Almanac. Bye-bye.